Hey, this is Blondeguygamer. Welcome to another Black Sheep Game Review. For Halloween in December. Look, I know this is way closer to Christmas, but MediEvil was inspired by Night Before Christmas, and that's both the Halloween and Christmas movies, so yeah, still appropriate even if I'm this late. And speaking of MediEvil, we're actually doing another game from that series. 5 years ago, oh geez, it really has been 5 years, I covered MediEvil 2 for They Made a Sequel along with my good friend STXCR. It was a game that was not quite as good as the first PlayStation 1 classic that I saw as being half glass full while SCR was half glass empty. And about a year after that video, the PlayStation 4 remake of the first game came out. But that wasn't the first time MediEvil 1 was remade. In 2005, we got MediEvil Resurrection for the PlayStation Portable. The reason why I want to do this as a black sheep is because unlike the PS4 remake, Resurrection is more of a retelling remake rather than a complete remastering of the original. So it is kind of an oddball entry nowadays. It also doesn't help that this is a PSP game, but it did get a digital release on the PSP, PlayStation Vita, TV, and even recently this year on PlayStation 4 and 5. Which I recorded on my PS5 as I saw that as an opportunity to do Resurrection this year, even though I had already recorded some footage on my PlayStation TV before. And thankfully I was able to download for free on PS4 and 5 since I bought it before. Figured it was the best way to play it now anyway. And you might be asking, where's SCR? Is he part of this review too? Well, while I actually have played through Resurrection on my PSP before, to my knowledge SCR hasn't. So I'm sure he won't mind if I just go on without him.
Not so fast. Not so fast. You thought you could say the name MediEvil within a 1,000-mile radius of me and I wouldn't show up?
Oh, well, I guess it was foolish of me to not have you in this video in some capacity.
Damn straight, and it's a good thing I got here just in time so we can finally start talking about Jumping Flash 2. It's still not Jumping Flash 2, is it?
Correct. It's MediEvil Resurrection.
Oh, right. This game.
I mean, if you have played it since we did MediEvil 2, you can stick around.
I would, but I haven't gotten around to it yet. My PSP is still busted.
It's been 5 years and your PSP is still broken?
Yeah. Hey, speaking of taking forever to get around to doing certain things, when's the next video for the Tales of retrospective?
Fair point, but you could still get it on PS4.
I don't know. I mean, I'm still kind of pissed that the only thing that happened after my ritual 5 years ago was this getting ported. So you can handle this, and I'll go work on another ritual, and maybe 5 years down the line we'll have something more for MediEvil. I mean, the 30th anniversary is coming up, right?
Sure, I'll see you around, SCR.
Later, Blondie. And if you happen to know of any farm animals or Twitch streamers that would make decent sacrifices, do let me know, alright?
Right, and with that, let's get into MediEvil Resurrection. The premise is pretty much the same as the original in that you play as Sir Daniel Fortescue, who led an army to stop the evil sorcerer Zarok, only to be the first one felled by an arrow in the battle. But the army still won and he was posthumously declared a hero afterwards, mostly to avoid the embarrassment on the King of Galamir's part. However, 100 years later, Zarok is at it again, taking the souls of the townsfolk and raising the dead for his schemes. But the magic ends up reanimating Dan, giving him a second shot at stopping Zarok and proving he actually is a hero that can save Galamir. It doesn't take long for something different to show up in Resurrection, as we're introduced to a new character shortly after Daniel awakens. Al-Zalam, a genie with a very stereotypical Middle Eastern dialect that had his magic stolen and became imprisoned in Daniel's head by Zarok. I don't like this character very much. He essentially becomes your overly chatty sidekick, giving you advice and whatnot throughout the game. I don't like him because he constantly monologues on just about everything, and his, shall we say, mid-2000s depiction I found to be pretty poorly aged and not very funny. Granted, I know this is a touchy subject when regarding this sort of thing, but I'm sure the devs didn't mean to be offensive and just want to make a silly character, so perhaps we could give some leeway to—
Beware, imps are sticky-fingered thieves. Trust me, we can spot our own.
Okay, no, he would get hella cancelled if this game came out today. Even without the, distinct humorous tone, Al-Zalam is a rather pointless addition to Resurrection. Even if he does provide guidance throughout the game, there are still books that you can read and the returning gargoyle statues, which you can legitimately just cut past Al-Zalam's intro to the gargoyles one and it would still be perfectly fine exposition. Couldn't they just have, I don't know, Morton the Earthworm from the original expanded on as a character for Resurrection instead? Deep cut, I know, but it would work since he resided in Dan's head in the original and give an excuse to bring him back for cut content. And it would certainly be less offensive at the very least. After the intro, we get to control Dan in his crypt for a quick tutorial area. You can practice combat, which has been updated a little. You still have different attacks with 2 buttons, except now they're quick and strong attacks, which you can string together some simple combos for. Although you can still do the tried and true attack method of charging up an attack, except now you're able to charge both attacks now. The quick charges with weapons like swords are usually a lunge, while the strong charges sweep around you like they did in the original. And there are other types of charge attacks too depending on the weapon. There's also a strafe function like before, but it's improved in that it actually targets the enemies and you can even do some evasive jumps and flips like in Ocarina of Time. Though it's not as fast as that, so you'll need to dodge well in advance in order to use them effectively. Oftentimes it's better to use the daring dash move to avoid getting hit, which like in MediEvil 2, you have in Resurrection right from the start as opposed to having to earn it from a boss fight like in the original MediEvil. Also, the lock-on doesn't quite stay on like in Zelda games, as you can lose it if you move over too much while doing so, but it is still a more reliable way to target enemies than before, especially for ranged weapon attacks. Along with the training area, there's a life bottle we can grab, the life-extending collectible of this series that acts similar to energy tanks for Metroid. There's also a study where you can read journal entries Dan makes after each level, but you can only read these in the crypt, so you'll probably forget about these after. Once we're ready to leave, we grab a rune that opens a door, a recurring level mechanic that was also used throughout the original MediEvil, to exit the crypt. We proceed into Galamir, where we select levels via an area map in a mostly linear fashion with occasional branches to find key items to continue the main path like before. The levels themselves still play out more or less the same, where you fight your way through numerous enemies, do some occasional platforming, which is a little weird and floaty here, but still better than the herky-jerky jumping of the first 2 games in my opinion. Use collected items from a menu for certain things, and reach an exit to complete them. All the while acquiring new weapons like clubs that can break rocks and be used as a makeshift torch, and shields that can protect you for a set amount of hit points with the L button, of which you can repair and restock ranged weapon ammo from merchant gargoyles you come across. What's new in Resurrection is that they actually sell health vials, when before you simply had to find them. I guess they learned their lesson of not being able to buy them in MediEvil 2. There are still life fountains and they pretty much instantly refill a couple life bottles of health. But with being able to buy health vials, it's even more convenient just to do that if you have enough gold that's scattered around. Lastly, there's the Chalice of Heroes in every level to collect. In the original MediEvil, you had to kill enough enemies to bring the chalice percentage to 100, then you can collect it. But in Resurrection, you can actually pick up the chalices before they are filled. It can be nice to not worry about killing enough enemies first and get them early, but sometimes it doesn't matter when the chalices are near the end of some levels anyway, and they'll be filled regardless as long as you slay everything on the way. Still, I suppose it's fine since it eliminates any backtracking for them. Your reward for collecting a chalice is going to the Hall of Heroes after the level, where heroes of the past give Daniel some new weapons and other rewards. It's just like in the first game, only this time the Hall of Heroes is a lot more brighter and heavily looking than the dimly lit but atmospheric dining hall of the original. And after getting these weapons, you'll also notice certain ones are now two-handed in Resurrection, which are more powerful, but slower and you can't equip a shield for balance reasons. Though it is kind of annoying to have to re-equip a shield every time you switch back to a one-handed weapon. A few levels in, you'll meet this game's version of Death, who is voiced by Tom Baker. He's also the narrator for the opening and the level loading screens, the latter of which can be pretty humorous.
Pumpkin Gorge, not George, Gorge. Pumpkin George hasn't been around these parts for years.
Also, MediEvil Resurrection having an English actor voice the narration in Death beats Castlevania Lords of Shadow by about 5 years. Anyway, Death lets us know that we actually need pieces of the Anubis Stone in order to defeat Zarok, which are also new for Resurrection. It's just a MacGuffin you need to get 4 pieces of, which you get along the way and are not hard to miss. These are rather superfluous in my opinion, as being a quest item for the sake of being one for something that wasn't and didn't need to be a quest item in the original. While on the topic of superfluous Resurrection editions, shortly after we get to Galamir Plains, a hub level of sorts that has exits to a few levels when available. It's also home to a carnival and farm where you can play some minigames. These range from shooting gallery style games with crossbows and trebuchets, enemy gauntlets, a lot of enemy gauntlets of various types actually, whack-a-mole or rather Zarok, and herding farm animals with some pretty fickle path leading. I'll still take this over the grandma herding Earthworm Jim 3D. I know what I just said. These are pretty optional in that you can get gold out of them. However, each minigame does have 9 rounds, and you get a token for completing them. What are these tokens for? Well, if you have the patience to go through all 9 rounds of these minigames and get all 8 tokens, you can purchase Wooden's sword from the Gargoyle shop in the Plains, which is the most powerful weapon in the entire game and is so powerful, it makes even the most dangerous enemies and bosses a cakewalk. I guess it is a reward for actually completing every minigame, which isn't too difficult to do, just a pretty mind-numbing experience, and your reward for doing so is a weapon that's too overpowered. Not to mention you can get this only about a quarter of the way into the game, and makes nearly every chalice weapon you collect after moot in comparison. Only maybe the axe with its throwing utility can even come close. Plus you'll have so much gold that you'll never run out and always be able to buy health and ammo refills, so it completely trivializes the game. Not that it was really that challenging before, but when you get a sword that takes out the strongest enemy in 1 or 2 hits, I'd say that's a bit too much. Other than that, there is a fortune teller that gives you hints for levels, which I guess could be helpful if you're going for everything like all the life bottles, but it's probably faster to just look them up rather than go through these. The Plains is a pretty pointless hub level honestly. It's smaller than even Ocarina of Time's Hyrule Field and is mostly just a spot to play all the minigames during the single player and not much else. Plus there's a couple of times you need to do a shooting gallery objective within levels anyway, so these just serve as a way to break this game if you choose to complete them all. And besides, all those minigames are really more for the multiplayer, which you actually can't do in the PS4 and 5 versions. The option isn't even there. But on the original PSP and even the Vita and TV versions, you can play these in 2-player local wireless multiplayer, as well as a mode where you race each other to ring bells throughout levels. This component is really here to show off the multiplayer capabilities of the PSP, and while it is a novel idea, it's just sort of there as something you could mess around with. I didn't have anyone to play these with, but was able to get these working myself with my PSP and TV. Since, yes, you can play multiplayer PSP games with those. However, I can only think of playing these with SDR, and even then, we would likely only play these once and maybe have mild entertainment out of these. And honestly, I think there was a bit too much focus on those minigames for new content, as there's not much else new and quite a bit from the original isn't here. Despite essentially being a remake, there are several levels from the original MediEvil that weren't included. Levels like the Asylum Grounds, the Ant Caves, the Lake, the Crystal Caves, the Gallows Gauntlet, the Entrance Hall, and the Time Machine are not in Resurrection. That's about what? A third of MediEvil 1's levels not present? Meanwhile, the PS4 remake retains all of those. So other than the pointless plains area and the minigames, what else is completely new here? Well, there's a scurvy docks level before the ghost ship, where you dress up Dan as a pirate. That's kind of fun. And there's Dragon Island where you get the dragon armor in this game. Only it's just a dragon boss fight that you fought in the Crystal Caves originally, so I wouldn't really count this as a new area. And, that's actually it. Mind you, the levels that are present in Resurrection, while mostly having the basis from the originals, are changed up a bit here and there, so they do have a fresher take on them. Still, I would like to see the rest of the levels done in this game too, and the new stuff doesn't really make up for it. Though the Asylum Grounds and Crystal Caves were cut due to time restraints, so the reason for that imbalance of content is the rush development this game had. Resurrection was originally going to be a PS2 game, beginning development in 2003. However, Sony Computer Entertainment Europe commissioned the Cambridge studio, the studio that made the previous MediEvil games, to make a launch PSP game for Europe and North America, which is what Resurrection became. And they were only given a year to do so, which means they had to do everyone's favorite thing in game development, crunch time, to make that deadline. Though the series creator and director of the original MediEvil, Chris Sorrell, was impressed at what they were able to do in that amount of time. So just to put things into perspective, a year of crunch development in 2005 can get you this. But what does that get you in 2023 that isn't a yearly sports game or Just Dance? Yeah. Chris Sorrell was also not able to direct Resurrection since he was busy working on 24 the game. Yes, you heard that right.
You think I'm done?
Dude, the frame rate. 75%!
And despite Resurrection being made from the same studio, nearly all the original MediEvil team were not involved. Jason Wilson, MediEvil 1's game designer and both games' art designer, while not on Resurrection's team, was able to reprise the voice of Daniel Fortescue, who is thankfully back to his missing lower jaw self and not the bad Saturday morning cartoon voice from 2 that no one liked. Other than that, only Mitch Phillips as the lead artist, originally the character animator from the first 2 games, Martin Pond as one of the writers who was also a writer for MediEvil 1, and the series composers Paul Unner and Andrew Barnabas, aka Bomb and Barn, returned for Resurrection. Well, that's still more of the original people involved in the upcoming Silent Hill 2 remake. Can't wait to see whether that joke ages well or not. What has aged better, or not depending on how you look at it, is the humor of this game. It is all pretty subjective, so this is just my take, but I do think it can be pretty funny, while being kind of annoying at other times. though that's mostly for Al-Zalam for the latter. It definitely goes pretty heavy into the witty British humor, while also going for a more contemporary take on fantasy tropes, which makes me kind of think the devs may have put too much Shrek influence into this, and seeing when the second movie came out, that tracks during development. Though the only direct movie reference I caught was Daniel pointing at Captain Jack Sparrow with his sinking boat here. Then again, it was practically impossible not to reference Pirates of the Caribbean when doing anything pirate related after that movie came out. I do prefer the more dark and snarky tones of the original, but I still have my fun with this goofier take on Daniel's adventure. And really, even though I had my complaints with Resurrection, there are still things I do like. I think the visuals, particularly for a launch PSP title, are pretty good, and it's upscaled quite nicely on PS4 and 5. Well, during gameplay at least. The same can't be said for the cutscenes, as they were heavily compressed to fit in that little UMD disc, so you'll definitely notice that while playing it on a big screen. Also, one thing I noticed is that the frame rate is around 30 FPS, when I could have sworn that on the PlayStation TV, the frame rate, while uneven, could get higher at times. Turns out the PS4 and 5 versions pulled a last scary in PS5 in that when they originally launched, the game was mostly around 60 FPS, but an update lowered the frame rate to a more consistent 30, which was updated by the time I recorded the game. Apparently this was because the 60 FPS caused issues for some things, according to a Reddit post reply I saw anyway, but I guess they couldn't fix that and other frame rate dropping issues, so they just went with 30 to prevent those. I didn't really mind playing this in a steady 30 FPS, but I do wish this could have played in 60 when you would think it easily could, especially on PlayStation 5. But in the long run, this is still the better way to play Resurrection nowadays. With the Vita and TV version second, as sure, at times the frame rate was higher, but was pretty inconsistent throughout the game. And on original hardware, I actually noticed the worst performance there. Not sure if it's my PSP or the component out capture, but it definitely struggled, especially in Dance Crypt for whatever reason. Some of the art design, on the other hand, I'm a little more mixed on. I feel this game is a little too bright at times, mostly with areas that were pretty dark and foreboding originally. Sometimes it's just a matter of having too much of this shade of green, or with the aforementioned Hollow Heroes being a complete contrast compared to the original. And speaking of the Hollow Heroes, let's talk character designs. Originally you just conversed with their statues, and that stays with the PS4 remake. But in Resurrection, they come to life in their original forms, and some are what you expect, but others have different interpretations. Let's just say I'm not a fan of how the Amazonian warrior Azami Ishongama is portrayed here. And what the hell did they do to Blood Skull Cleaver? Originally he was a nomadic warrior, and here he's some dwarf-looking ass with an accent that I have no idea what the devs were going for.
Why you, for to scare, you who catch foot on grass like girl in chase scene, woo-hoo, twist the ankle and shot, dad, straighten eye by harrow, squish, gurgle gurgle, without blood of enemy on hands, eh?
Those aside, I actually don't mind most of the redesigns here. Daniel looks fine in others, while some pretty different from the original, do benefit from being more expressive compared to the PlayStation 1 and fit thematically with the more cartoony nature Resurrection goes for, so your preferences may vary. But if there's one thing I have no real complaints about, it's the music. I actually do say that with a lot of the games I review now that I think about it. You'd think I'd be doing Sonic games at this point. Ha! Bob and Barr knocked it out of the park with some excellent remade music. And if you thought their work was good with synthetic instruments, wait until you hear what they do with real orchestral instruments courtesy of the City of Prague Philharmonic Orchestra. My only nitpick is that some tracks that originally played for specific levels and parts play on different levels, like the credits theme over the Pools of the Ancient Dead for example, though I don't even really mind since it's still really good. There's even stuff for levels that aren't in Resurrection, there's a remake track for MediEvil 2, and while there's not a lot of new stuff, tracks like the sea shanty theme of the Scurvy Docks are equally as good. Heck, the music in this is so good that they were used and remastered for the PS4 remake, along with the new arrangements for everything else the Resurrection soundtrack didn't cover, so it actually does complement those well. And really, with that music playing through the game, I had an okay time playing this. The level-to-level gameplay itself was fine, and even for an early PSP game, the camera was mostly okay. It certainly would benefit with a second analog stick, like most PSP games, but the game does a decent job of keeping the view behind you, and the targeting and strafe button helps to manually keep it there. While I do objectively think this is an alright game, especially for a launch PSP game, I prefer the original MediEvil over this. Resurrection does have its high points and can be fun to play, but I think the original had a more complete package as an adventure, and the omission of some of those levels in favor of a bunch of minigames and multiplayer were really just there to show off the wireless capabilities of the PSP. That and the revised plot points on how to get pieces of the Anubis Stone and the annoying sidekick of Al-Zalam I felt weren't needed. Though at the very least, if you are a MediEvil fan, I would say this is still an interesting take on the first game if you want to experience it. But if you haven't played MediEvil before, I suggest at least trying the first game before this, even if it's more dated gameplay-wise. Though Resurrection is easier to get into and not too challenging to get everything. The trophies on the PS4 and 5 version aren't hard to get the Platinum either. I only had to re-enter a couple of stages to get them all. Funnily enough, there is a trophy to get for minigame tokens, but not for all 8 or the Woden Sword, so you don't even need to do all that if you just want the trophies. However, since Resurrection, we have gotten the PlayStation 4 remake, which I would say is the go-to way to play MediEvil 1 nowadays. Don't let the seemingly mid Metacritic score dissuade you, I really don't agree with that. I may be biased as someone that actually played the original and then this, which some live reviewers didn't, and apparently having this faithful remake of a PlayStation game still having the fundamentals of a PlayStation game makes it dated and not good by today's standards. Yeah, real fair mindset there. There's no way this score is slightly worse than Resurrection's. The latter is more accurate, honestly. Also, nice. I mean, come on, you look at this run cycle and tell me this game is only a 6 out of 10. You can't. You can even unlock the original PlayStation version in that, so you'll have both there. That alone makes this a way better remake. But since Resurrection is now also on modern PlayStation systems, you could always get that too since it's not too expensive to download. Though fun fact, you can still buy MediEvil 1 and Resurrection on PS3s and Vitas, so props on Sony for still having those options. Now that I think about it, poor MediEvil 2 still hasn't been re-released, as if that one's the black sheep. I may only like that one about as much as they did Resurrection, but it still deserves one to make the whole series available. Other than 2 maybe getting a Classics release like with Resurrection, I don't know if we'll ever get another MediEvil game. The Cambridge studio has been closed as of 2017 as Guerrilla Cambridge, but what about Other Ocean and Maryville, the developers of the PS4 remake? They did get Jason Wilson to voice Daniel and the composers for that, so maybe they could do an official MediEvil 3. What have they been doing since then? Oh, they made a couple of games for the Television Amico. Something, I'm sure Tommy Talerico's mother is very proud of them. Okay, so maybe we won't get a new MediEvil game anytime soon, but who knows? Maybe we'll get a new remake in 2023, 14 years after the PS4 remake, which was 14 years after Resurrection. Still wouldn't be as bad as the Last of Us games. At the very least, Resurrection getting a recent Classics release makes the series not completely neglected these days. So unless you're a big of a MediEvil fan like SCR is and do some, questionable practices to ensure the series still gets love, I'm pretty content with the PS4 remake for now. But hey, Resurrection's not too bad either, if you look at it half glass full like I did. Just like I did with MediEvil 2. I guess I'm kind of predictable like that. But until maybe a 2 re-release or whatever else might come up in the future, that's gonna do it for the MediEvil series for now. I should check up on SDR in case this ritual goes a little too far, so I'll see you all in the next video.